My name's Alex Villec. I'm a sophomore in the college. I'm studying economics and government with a minor in French. I am a member of the Georgetown triathlon team, and I play drums in a band. I had the chance to be Congresswoman Giffords' intern, or one of her interns, last summer in Tucson and this past fall in Washington, D.C. And I also went door to door for a campaign in 2008.
So you encountered Mr. Loughner directly before the event. Can you just briefly address that encounter?
Mm-hmm. Well, my job at the event was to stand in front of the Congresswoman and redirect constituents to the back of the line who were waiting in line to speak with her. This is an event called Congress on Your Corner. She's had 25 of them in the past, and what she does is she takes a couple hours out of her day to talk one-on-one with voters who have questions, who have concerns, and they want them addressed. So Mr. Loughner, just like any other constituent, at least a lot of other constituents, came up and wanted to know if the Congresswoman was there. So I kind of motioned behind me and let him know that she was meeting with a constituent at the time. But if he got in the back of the line, then she'd be with him in 20-25 minutes. So he seemed to comply at first. He kind of walked away as my remarks were trailing off. He was a little dismissive, a little standoffish, but eventually went to the back of the line. He came back about a minute and a half, 2 minutes later, and this time he walked right in front of me. He didn't acknowledge my presence. He didn't try to engage me in conversation. He didn't have a question. He just walked right by me, and before I knew it, he was barging through a little barrier that was separating the public from myself and the Congresswoman and the staff. And that's when he opened fire.
Did you see him produce the handgun?
I did not. I didn't see the gun itself, but out of my peripheral vision, I saw him, assume this imposing stance and raise his arm up and start to shoot.
And when did you realize, this is a crisis situation, there's gunfire?
Well, I haven't been around a lot of gunfire in my life. It took a second for it to really set in. Not only that I was in danger, but that this man was shooting, a real gun. People were dying before my eyes, and I had to take refuge. So I went behind a pillar that was separating the parking lot from the Safeway, from the grocery store. I saw a man lying on the ground after a couple of seconds, and that's when it really hit me. And that's when I saw with my own eyes what was taking place. And the first thought that occurred to me was to save my own life. And I took off. I ran to a bank that was about 100 meters away in the same shopping center. And that's where I stayed for about a half an hour until a sheriff came and got me.
And were you with a large group at this point?
I wasn't. I was the only person who ended up running off. I can only attribute my survival to luck. I ran while the shooting was still taking place. Who knows what could have ensued had I not left. But most people stayed in the vicinity for the event. The people who are still telling the story, who happened to be so fortunate as to survive, were extremely lucky because they were there. They were there next to people who weren't so lucky, and so I'm just so gracious to be here.
And you were able to make a 911 call, correct?
I was actually a customer at the bank ended up calling 911, and I spoke with the operator about 10 seconds after arriving there.
And you also, I know, lost a good friend and a staff member in the shooting. Can you just speak a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman Giffords' community outreach director, Gabe Zimmerman, was 30 years old. He was a social worker prior to assuming the job of the Congresswoman, and he dedicated his life to helping people. I first met Gabe last summer in the office in Tucson when I was working in the district office, and what struck me about him was the fact that he understood, like nobody else I've ever come across, the very intimate and almost sacred link between a people and that people's government, and he was able to put into words and embody in his actions better than anybody else what it means to help somebody in need, to help a constituent who, for the first time, is getting in touch with the federal government, who doubtless feels a little intimidated and a little skeptical of the power of the government to do good. And he was somebody who placated aggression, who consoled people's sorrow, and was able to turn a lot of desperation into hope, and a lot of success stories in terms of this office. As far as congressional offices go, Congresswoman Giffords opened or closed more cases for constituents than any other office in the entire country opened during the same time period, and he was at the forefront of that effort.
And just yourself in the aftermath of all this, how are you feeling? How are you dealing with it?
Well, I'm feeling all right, and I've been told time and again, I've got to focus on me moving forward and just making sure this is all registered and processed in my mind. And each day is different. Sometimes it's disbelief, and sometimes it's sadness, and sometimes it's just frustration. And it's been a mix of these three over the last couple of days. Yeah. So just in regard to Jared Loughner, I would say that we as a society have to realize that some people are wrestling with really difficult issues mentally, and we have to devote all the time and energy we can to making sure that those people aren't drawn, to the end of an abyss where they feel like the only way out of their misery is committing a crime like this. In the aftermath of the event, I guess a few things that I've taken away from this are just how much I cherish, what I've got and this life. And it was made very clear to me how fleeting this is. How in 1 second you have a congresswoman fulfilling her most fundamental goal as a member of Congress, speaking with constituents, addressing their concerns, and then just seconds later, it's complete pandemonium, and people are falling, and this is something that can't happen in America, and I think that's why the nation is so shocked, is that the idea of our democracy and the idea of an interaction between public servants and the public was ruptured. This connection was ruptured, and that's just got people up in arms, as it should.
So really the last thing I want to touch on here is something you just mentioned, media and detectives and police.
Yeah.
You've been required to talk about this a lot.
Right.
So what has your experience been with all the detectives and the hours of questioning?
Yeah. Well, in the seconds and the minutes and even the hours after the event, I spoke primarily with sheriffs and detectives, and although it was kind of an unsettling experience at first, having to relive it in my head, what I ultimately came to feel was, or at least understand, was that even in the worst tragedies, in a time when it feels like the world's falling apart, these law enforcement officials are a steadfast source of stability. And that is, despite what I had to say, going through it again and again in words, speaking with them comforted me, and their presence comforted me, and I can't say enough about what it means for us to have people like that in our society that in the worst of times are able to be resilient and stoic to the extent they can, and provide that kind of comfort for those who are involved.